completely go. Hey guys, all right, so we are doing our study group time. So for those of you tuning in, wanting a reading, that was the last hour. Now we're in our study group time. So that's what we're going to be focusing on and working on. So we are on A Course in Miracles, and I am reading the annotated version of A Course in Miracles, which is the version of the book that includes all of Helen Schumann's notes regarding the content and her thought process when she was channeling and connecting with who she claims is Jesus in her channelings. So that's who she's talking to as well. So last time we left off in the middle of like a section, so I'm going to pick up where we left off at, and then I'm also going to go over notes with y'all as well, so we can work through some of the notes in that. But I'm just going to read, and I'm just going to kind of go through what she's saying. If it's hard to follow along, just FYI, because some of the verbiage is a little technical in the way that they're using it, and they're being very specific with the kinds of words they're using for the channeling, and so that may be what that's about. So just FYI, in case you get lost, and that's okay. I'm going to come back and I'm going to clarify what they're talking about or what's going on in the conversation between her and the channeling with her and Jesus as well. All right, so let's start here. Let's see, make sure. There we go. Okay. So the last part we left off on was 6. Okay, so the reason why only the mind can make or create is more obvious than maybe immediately apparent. Spirit has been created. The body is a learning device for the mind. Learning devices are not lessons in themselves. Their purpose is merely to facilitate the thinking of the learner. The most that a faulty use of a learning device can do is to fail to facilitate learning. It does not have the power in itself to introduce actual learning errors. The body, if properly understood, shares the invulnerability of the atonement to two-edged application. This is not because the body is a miracle, but because it is not inherently open to misinterpretation. The body is merely a fact in this world. Its abilities can be and frequently are overvaluated. However, it is almost impossible to deny its existence in this world. Those who are engaging in a particularly unworthy form of denial, let me reread that because that part was weird. Those who do are engaging in a particularly unworthy form of denial. That's what I mean to say. The use of the word unworthy here implies simply that it is not necessary to protect the mind by denying the unmindful. There is little doubt that the mind can miscreate. If one denies this unfortunate, looking past error to truth, lost my place here. I was like, yeah, that's where it was. Okay. Oh, there we go. Let's do this. I was like, okay, there it goes. I lost my place. I was like, oh my God, what happened? And like everything changed. Okay. There is little doubt that the mind can miscreate. If one denies this unfortunate aspect of its power, one is also denying the power itself. All material means which you accept as remedies for bodily ills are simply restatements of magic principles. It was the first level of the error to believe that the body created its own illness. Thereafter, it is a second misstep to attempt to heal it through non-creative agents. It does not follow, however, that the application of these very weak corrective devices is evil. Sometimes the illness has sufficiently great a hold over an individual's mind to render him inaccessible to atonement. In this case, one may be wise to utilize a compromise approach to mind and body in which something from the outside is temporarily given healing ability or healing belief. This is because the last thing that can help the non-right-minded or the sick is an increase in fear. They are already in a fear-weakened state. If they are inappropriately exposed to a straight and undiluted miracle, they may be precipitated into panic. This is particularly likely to occur when upside-down perception has induced the belief that miracles are frightening. The value of the atonement does not lie in the manner in which it is expressed. In fact, it if it is truly used, it will inevitably be expressed in whatever way is most helpful to the receiver, not the giver. This means that a miracle, to attain its full efficacy, must be expressed in a language which the recipient can understand without fear. It does not follow by any means that this is the highest level of communication of which he is capable, but it does mean that it is the highest level of communication of which he is capable now. The whole aim of the miracle is to raise the level of communication, not to impose regression, in the improper sense, upon it. Before it is safe to let miracle workers loose in this world, it is essential that they understand fully the fear of release. Otherwise, they may unwittingly foster the belief that release is imprisonment, which is very prevalent. This misperception arose from the attempted protection device or misused defense that harm can be limited to the body. This was because of the much greater fear which this one counteracts, that the mind can hurt itself. Neither error is really meaningful because the miscreations of the mind do not really exist. That recognition is a far better protection device than any form of level confusion, because of the advantages of introducing correction at the level of the error. It is essential that the remembrance remain with you that only mind can make or create. Implicit in this is the corollary that correction belongs at the thought level and not at either level to which correction is inapplicable. To repeat an earlier statement and also to extend it somewhat, spirit is already perfect and therefore does not require correction. The body does not really exist except as a learning device for the mind. This learning device is not subject to errors of its own because it was made but does not make. It should be obvious, then, that correcting the maker or including it to give up miscreation is the only application of creative power which is inherently meaningful at all. We said before that magic is essentially mindless or the destructive miscreative use of the mind. Physical medicines are a form of spells. In one way, they are a more benign form in that they do not entail the possession fallacy, which does enter when a mind believes that it can possess another. Since this is considerably less dangerous through still incorrect, it has its advantages. It is particularly helpful to the therapist who really wants to heal, but is still fearful himself. By using physical means to do so, he is not engaging in any form of enslavement, even though he is not applying the atonement. This means that his mind is dulled by fear, but is not actively engaged in distortion. Those who are afraid of using the mind to heal are right in avoiding it, because the very fact that they are afraid has made them vulnerable to miscreation. They are therefore likely to misunderstand any healing they might induce, and because egocentricity and fear usually occur together, may be unable to accept the real source of healing under these conditions. It is safer for them to rely temporarily on physical healing devices because they cannot misperceive them as their own creations. As long as their own vulnerability persists, it is essential to preserve them from even attempting miracles. And I'm going to stop there because that's enough for all of the stuff we're about to talk about. So here's the thing with this. First of all, and I was just having this conversation with my friend earlier today, because our belief our belief and our state of fear can actually make us vulnerable to circumstances or conditions. So, for example, when someone is let's say smudging their home, or they're trying to cleanse the energy of their home, if they have an inkling of fear in doing that, and they don't come from a place of empowerment or own that space, and instead feel like they're at the mercy of some unseen force, or that they are going to essentially they could invoke some sort of darkness or evil, there's fear in that. you shouldn't try to cleanse your own home. You shouldn't try to go and do it. This is why you'll see all those stories and like those paranormal shows where people try to do a traditional like smudging with like sage and all that, and then like that doesn't really help because they probably didn't do it right the first time, because they were going into it with a lot of fear and anxiety, and they weren't really being empowered in that state. And this is one of the reasons why some people, when they do a clearing, it sticks, and others who do it, it pretty much does nothing for them. And actually, for those of you who are interested, I talk specifically about this phenomena with doing a smudging or a clearing of your energy space, a blessing of something. I talk about it on one of my videos on my class that I offer for those of you who are interested in taking the class for free. It's on my YouTube channel. You can get there through my website. Just go down to classes and it's right there. But I talk about smudging and cleansing and how there's a right way, there's a wrong way. Now, when I talk about the right way, I'm not talking about the methodology or about all the little things you use. You could technically do a complete cleansing of a space with spit if you wanted to, as long as it was you were empowered in the process of doing it. So I talk about how to do something like that from a very empowered place in that video. And you can get there through my website. But this also has to do with people who feel like they're like open to curses, or people can cast a curse on them. I had a friend who I was talking about earlier who was asking me about like black magic and curses and like, what is that? Like, is that real? And I'm like, look, we all come into this plane of existence. We all come into this reality completely within our own power and divinity. The moment that we condition ourselves to operate from the perspective of fear and limitation and lack, which is what this world is kind of, it causes us to have that experience, at that point, you are more vulnerable to experiences that are going to produce and bring more of that into your life. So if, for example, I am walking around and I feel empowered and I feel like I'm protected and I know who I am and I know where my power comes from, which I do, then if someone's out there trying to gather 100 people to cast a spell on me, it's not going to have any power because I know myself and I know what I possess. And so that's nothing. That's literally nothing. But people who walk around thinking that they're open or vulnerable or someone can cause that kind of effect on them, they basically open the door to negativity to come into their lives. And so if you walk around having a negative state of mind, constantly in your mind, griping or bitching about this or bitching about that, or frustrated because of this or frustrated because of that, or feeling low or feeling down or feeling useless or feeling like you have no value or worth, etc. If you're walking around with this internal state of being, you have aligned yourself to the damning of you from life. You basically aligned yourself to natural curses of crap going wrong in your life. That doesn't mean that nothing will ever go wrong when you're coming from a higher place, because you're still here in human form for specific experiences. You're going to go through your life, and there are certain experiences that your life is designed to give to you from how you set it up before you were born. But once you're down here, we're going to have those experiences, but we also don't need to deal with extra drama in the process of that. If you have to go through boot camp, is it really going to be helpful to bitch and complain about every single action and activity you have to take while you're going through all of the different stages of that boot camp? Is it going to be helpful to you to constantly complain or feel like every person that's there doing the same thing is out to get you? Is it going to help you to constantly worry about, well, what if I can't get above that? Or what if I can do that? And what ifs and what ifs, what ifs? If you are walking through life with these kinds of mental states, you are essentially aligning yourself with lower vibratory states of suffering, and you're going to induce more suffering for yourself. More suffering than you need to, because there's a level of suffering we're going to experience because we're in human form, but then there's suffering you don't have to endure, you don't have to go through. Most people do because they're literally creating unconsciously. They're going forward, they're producing this energy, they're sending it out in waves, and what they get back is a reflection of that. And then they're like, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I be in a relationship? Why is this? Why is that? Because they're not looking at what they're producing from their internal mechanisms and from the eternal state. So if you've got a lot of crap that's going wrong on a regular basis in your life, it's not the universe that's out to get you, and it's not even your world that's out to get you. Granted, that's probably playing a factor, but it is you that is sustaining a state of suffering, a state of low vibration or low frequency or pain or anger or resentment or whatever, victimhood. All of those are lower vibratory states, and it's only going to produce and amplify what you produce into the world in that form and bring back even more of it. That's the link, that's the cause there. So if you want to change your life, don't change the circumstances in your life. Change yourself first. Start with yourself by changing your perspective, by approaching things differently, by acting differently, by thinking differently about things. And then your circumstances will also change in the process. And then you'll actually shift the trajectory of your life. But it has to start with you. Don't go out and then come within. Go within first and then take that out. And then that's where you want to start with that. Because if not, then you're going to find yourself kind of stuck in a zone or in a mode of operating. And that's going to be your norm. And that's going to become the norm of your life. And so something here that they're talking about is the idea of this feeling of like, magic, for example, when it's talking about like healing and so forth. By default, being God in form, we are perfect. There's nothing wrong with us. So those imperfections, those issues end up materializing in this level, in this stage from this platform, because it is essentially reflection. What we're encountering and what we're producing on this level is a reflection of our internal mechanisms or our internal state. So when we're suffering from an illness or a condition, those conditions fall in two categories. Either this condition has shown up in your life to get you to experience something a certain way so that you could gain for the purpose of your soul, or this condition is a reflection of what you're putting out. And it is simply life reflecting back to you something that is already existing within yourself. So if you, for example, are walking around embracing a state of victimhood and you've been a victim your entire life, even though you've probably gone through some things that you could say are definitely situations that victims go through, but if you turn life into a scenario where life is victimizing you, what happens at that point is that you may also begin to experience conditions within your body that reflect a sense of being victimized, that make you even more vulnerable, that make you even more exposed, that make you even more likely to be negatively impacted by the world around you as well. So you're kind of giving yourself a set of instructions without even realizing it. And your body's going to take its cue from you and it'll start to react in that way. So that's why it's important. That's why it's important to be aware of what's going on inside of you, what's happening internally, because your body is a reflection of the mind, honestly. That doesn't mean that you're never gonna, if you have a perfect mind and you think perfectly, which isn't possible in this state of being human, that doesn't mean that if you think you're in a perfect state of mind, then your body will never have issues. I know people who they go through extreme measures to be healthy, and then they develop an issue that has like nothing to do with how they've been supporting themselves or sustaining their body, and they've actually done really good things to try to be healthy. And the reason is because there's something going on inside of them that is kind of materializing, and the only place it can go to materialize is in the body. And so that's what tends to happen with the body. The body's reacting to what's going on with us in a subconscious level or unconscious level in that way. So let me go to my notes, because I want to bring up my notes for a second to kind of talk about this. So my notes. So let's talk about this. All right. So what I wrote down, what they were talking about in that section, there's a few things, and then I'm going to go over and check what y'all were asking me about this, because we can talk about this a little bit more. The body is a tool for the experience of life and assists with the mind in learning. Unique body complications and circumstances may serve as an additional tool for experiences. We may think we understand that. We don't, because everything that we go through can serve a purpose, but there are experiences each of us will go through individually that can give our soul an experience that it desires, which is why it's here in this physical form, in this body, for that particular experience. So the body's just a tool. This physical body is just a tool. That's why I don't really get so caught up with my body. It's nice, for example, I used to be a bit heavier and I lost 50 or 60 pounds last year, but I am not so obsessed with my body, because even though, I'm not an ugly person, but at the same time, I know that, looks or even feeling attractive or being attractive is limited, because, as people age, things happen, things start to sink, things start to sag, things just change. And so this body is only going to look this way for so long. So whether I think I'm attractive or not doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, this body is only here to serve the purpose of me learning through it, of having experiences through it. So I don't put a lot of emphasis on my body. I mean, I do try to do right by my body. I walk every day, almost 4 miles a day. I try to eat on the vegan side of things. And I do try to not push my body harder than it can go, especially with the work that I do. So when my body is, crashing, I'm like, okay, it's asking me to take a break. And so I'm going to give it a break, and I'll take a break, and I will, not show up. I'll tell people, hey, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do a live today, but I'll listen to my body. So I have to take care of my body because it's given me a chance to have this human experience, but it is still just a physical body. It's just a shell. And this is what they mean when, your body is a temple. When your body is a temple, that doesn't mean you worship the temple, because usually inside the temple, there's something that is there that you actually gain from the experience. There's either a book of knowledge or wisdom, or there are masters or teachers within the temple. So the body is a temple. It doesn't mean worship the temple and the temple is everything. It just means take care of your body because you need it, because it houses what you're experiencing and what you're gaining from a spiritual perspective. So take care of the body. So that's what it is meant by that. An overemphasis of the body does not serve the process of learning for the soul. So in other words, people have a tendency to become super obsessed with their physical appearance. And when someone becomes physical obsessed with their physical appearance, that is a form of possession. When someone becomes obsessed with sex, that is a form of possession. When somebody becomes obsessed with how their body looks, or with changing the body, or with this, it is a type of possession, because what it means is that person is overly identifying and overly attached to their physical nature that does not necessarily allow for a spiritual awareness of things. That doesn't mean that you're not going to go through experiences, even in illness or in intentional change of the body through like surgery or like plastic surgery. That doesn't mean you're not going to gain experiences through those things, because those are avenues for learning about the self as well. But when we become overly focused, or we overly emphasize the body as an epitome of something, we're essentially we're instead of focusing on the blueprint, instead of focusing on the materials, instead of focusing on the house that is going to be built, we become obsessed with the hammer. But the hammer is just a tool. It serves a purpose. I'm not going to sit there and worship the hammer as if it's the best thing ever, because it's just a hammer at the end of the day. It only serves to allow us an experience. Cures and treatments are processes which reinstate the body's systems. Producing future health is based in the mind's creative process. In other words, being that we are God in form, we are perfect, meaning that the ability to revert and to remember and to reclaim that godly completeness is available to each and every one of us. Even though we're only fragments of the divine in form, we can reclaim that part of ourselves just by reminding ourselves, and just choosing to claim that. The thing about it is, there's only so much of that we can do in this form, because at the end of the day, we are still in this form for a reason, which means the body by nature, by default, is designed to break down. It's designed to not do everything we want it to do. It's designed to affect us or to cause within us certain things. It's designed a certain way, and there's a reason for it. If we didn't get older, then we would probably not get to a place where we get tired and we're ready to check out. Children are very vulnerable. And so because they're very vulnerable and they require the assistance or the support of others, then people begin to care for the child, and they condition the child to the nature of this reality. Without the parent, the child would evolve in its own way, understanding life from its own unique, direct perspective, but it would be vulnerable. So the vulnerability factor for a child is that it's forced to have to learn how to live this reality through its teachers, through its models, through its parents. Same thing, as we get older, we are forced to have to accept the fact that we are reaching the ending of our work here, of our experience here, and it's making us eager to get back to the other side. Because I can tell you, once you start getting older, the body starts to break down. You start to have stuff just be achy more, and I'm already getting there. I'm already starting to have that achiness. I'm like, oh gosh, I got another 20, 30 years to go. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it that far. So I'm already having to okay, just the body, don't worry about it. Just start moving, start working, start doing what you got to do, and you'll get over it. So that's how I try to approach that in this situation. So whenever we are dealing with an illness, for example, we essentially, one of two things is happening. Either the illness is a state or condition that can induce an experience for us. So it shows up to help us have that experience. Or the condition is a expression and a reflection of our state of being and is reflecting and giving us that. So it's usually one or the other. So for example, when I used to do Reiki for people, and they used to come to my home and I used to, do the whole bit. Some people by default, just by showing up already are inducing a state of healing because they are using just me as a symbol of healing for them. So as they're coming to get their healing and I'm doing what I'm doing, all I'm doing when I do Reiki and when I did Reiki for people is I just basically focused love on them. I just focused on sending them love and telling them that they are beautiful creatures and that they are loved and they are adored and they have value and they have worth. And then I would allow the energy to come through me and to affect them the way it's going to affect them. But the energy that came through me wasn't coming from me. It is a part of me. It's a part of you because it's God, but it isn't me telling them what to do. It is them summoning their highest self and their highest form of being through me into themselves, and they're accepting it through that. And sometimes that's what we need. Sometimes some of us cannot get what we need. Sometimes some of us don't change if we're telling ourselves something that we just are not really accepting. But when it comes from someone else, we accept it, or we're like, okay, it came from them, they're right. But yet we've been telling ourselves that, forever. So sometimes we need the healing method, the healing process to come through someone else or through something else, which is what medication serves as. It's a reminder, it's a representation of a opportunity for healing. Now, if you want to get very technical on this level of reality, yes, everything has a direct reaction. Medications are these chemical components, there's these organisms, whatever you want to think of it. There's physiological things that are a part of that, but that's not what I'm specifically talking about. I'm talking about that it is simply from the matrix standpoint or from this reality standpoint, it is a representation of healing. And so when we go to the doctor and we receive something, then we can induce that state of healing and it will actually affect us in the way that it's meant to. In most cases or in very often in that way. Sometimes people actually heal from taking a placebo because it is the idea that I'm giving myself permission to heal or to recover that's coming from that. So that's what that's about as well. Overshadowing of the body's condition can prevent the process of atonement for the mind. Under extreme situations, it is beneficial to assist the body through external methods and treatment to act as a stabilizing force, while it is still up to the mind to facilitate further healing. When someone is going through a condition or a circumstance, and they are in such a deep, dark place within themselves, they're not going to be able to induce a period of healing for themselves or induce any kind of healing for themselves because they're basically the epitome of what the opposite is. So sometimes when someone is in that state, the idea of introducing a cure or a opt-out of that state can begin the process of healing for them, can begin that work for them. And so some people in that state may actually require or need something that we can consider a temporary measure to create a stabilizing force for them so that they can begin the process of healing, which is understandable in some instances. Illness is a fear-weakened state. So illness is equal to a state of fear that is materializing within the body. People in severe states of fear do not see synchronicities and alignments as miracles or tools for progress and healing. They become paranoid and associate it further with further states of fear. So in other words, when I talk about miracles and the whole idea of A Course in Miracles, the word miracle, what I keep saying is interchangeable with synchronicities and alignment. So when we think of miracles, we're thinking of synchronicities and alignment. When things come together or pieces come together in a way that is just beyond like reason or belief. That's what we're talking about when we talk about miracles. So people who are sustaining a low vibe state, or they're coming from a state of fear and a state of fear and lack or a victimhood, if they start to experience synchronicities or they start to experience moments where things like line up, they don't always react in the most positive of ways. For example, I had a client earlier who was seeing these repeating numbers. I'm seeing 1111 or 666 or 555. I'm seeing these repeating numbers. And immediately they're like, what, what are they trying to tell me? Like, I'm freaking out. Like, what are they trying to tell me? It's like, and they went into a state of paranoia with it. And I'm just like, well, it doesn't mean anything bad. All it is an affirmation from the universe that what you're experiencing right now, whether positive or negative, is what should be happening. What you're going through is what's needed because there's something from this that your soul is gaining. So pay attention and embrace all that you can learn from this experience and just do the best that you can. That's what that means. But a person who is in a state of fear, oh my God, like something out of the ordinary is happening, it must be bad because the universe is designed to punish me or to make me suffer or to hurt me. And that's where that mindset is coming from. So for those people who are thinking that that's a negative sign or that means something and they're taking it in a negative place, it's not because it's a negative thing. It's because they are caught up in fear and they're seeing it from a place or a perspective of fear. Spirit is always perfect and does not require correction. So the personality, the being that I am, Ferny, that personality is perfect as it is. Let me make that clear to you because people are going to completely misunderstand what I mean by that. It doesn't mean that I am a perfect human being. What I am talking about is the way that my personality, my costume, the costume of Ferny, the way that was designed for this lifetime is perfect. It is designed exactly how it should be to experience and gain from this reality what it's meant to. So it is as it should be. And the more authentic you are, the more you allow yourself to be authentic, the more you embrace the perfection of that design. But for those people who think something's wrong with them, they need to be fixed, there's something that's broken within them, they immediately create the imperfection within themselves. They basically break themselves in the process of trying to look for those imperfections or acknowledging themselves as imperfect. And so they instead induce states of imperfection, even though they are perfectly designed as is, but they induce these states of imperfection. And so that's an issue because essentially you're shooting yourself in the foot trying to run a race, complaining that your feet hurt. And so you're like, my feet hurt, I'm running the race, but my feet hurt. Yeah, it's going to hurt because you're running a race. But then they're like, yeah, but I need to fix this. And so the only way they think to fix it is to stop the pain. If I stop the pain, then I will no longer feel the pain of my feet. So I'm going to shoot my foot because that'll stop the pain and end the mechanism of feeling pain. Like that's the opposite of what you should do. You're shooting yourself in the foot. Stop it. Like what you're experiencing, this moment of suffering is just a temporary state. Let it be. Do the best that you can, and that's kind of the central message there. But we're designed perfectly as we are personality-wise. This is actually, I don't know, for those of you who've seen the film Soul, which is it's a really cute film. I just saw it for like the first time a few days ago, and I'm going to do my next podcast on it because it's a really good film because they must have got some spiritually minded people to help with that film because there's a lot of elements in that film that are very representative of what is actually going on behind the scenes or in spirit form. And I know this because this is my experience. And it's funny to see them. I've been talking about this stuff for years, guys, and I've put out like graphs and stuff of how they've shown me how things are, how things exist in that state. To see it in a movie being like represented ideally the way that I have shared it, I'm like, this is so wonderful to see like what I'm being told by spirit showing up in the film as well. And this is not just for me. A lot of people have been guided by spirit, shown and given glimpses of what it's really like from that state. And to see that on film is really, really cool. But going back to what they were talking about, in part of the film, for those of you who haven't seen it, the new souls, by the way, no soul is new, but the new soul is being given a personality. So it has to go through these different levels to kind of get different parts to its personality because those aspects or those pieces of their personality are going to serve them when they're going through their life's experience. And so it's the same thing. You are as you should be when you actually embrace the authentic version of yourself and are not coming from a place of conditioned fear or lack. When you're coming from a place of conditioned fear or lack, you are essentially turning against yourself and you're embracing a lower standard of yourself and lowering your vibratory state. And then you will begin to become that thing. You'll become the victim. You'll become that lower state of yourself. Possession is a fallacy. One mind cannot possess another. That individual's In support, let me go back to that. Possession is a fallacy. One mind cannot possess another. It is. Another person doesn't have the authority to control you in any way, shape, or form. So if you believe yourself to be controlled by others, that is you basically making up some bullshit and telling yourself and buying into it. That's what that is. Because it goes against the law of free will. It can't happen. So when people say, oh, well, someone cast a curse on me and they made me do this, and no, because curses don't actually exist. Curses are just a funny, fancy word for a block of energy. And if someone's sending you a block of energy and you're more than receptive, you will receive it and it'll become a part of your system. And so you can't be cursed by anyone unless you wish the curse upon yourself or you accept to be cursed by others in that way. So being possessed by someone's energy, some people say, oh, well, I had an ex and I can't stop thinking about him and it's almost like I'm possessed by them. No, sweetheart, you're not possessed by them. You're giving yourself permission to essentially embrace that individual's state of mind and energy, and you're fusing or starting to create a more psychic bond. So you're going to become even more possessed, but you're actually just becoming more obsessed. And that's what it is. You're becoming obsessed, more obsessed by that person's energy, not possessed, because nothing can possess you. You allow yourself to become more obsessed and more fixated on that. So there is no possession. In supporting or helping people to become absorbed within that individual's energy, it strips self of protection and allows a vulnerability to exist. There is also a lack of acknowledgement that the individual who is in suffering is not by their own choice, choosing such states. So if someone is in a state of suffering, in some way, shape, or form, whether you can acknowledge or understand it in the moment or not, they have chosen that state from a perspective of being. Even if they didn't choose it from a conscious state, their soul may have chosen that state from a state of being. But they are sustaining or maintaining that. And that is their choice in the moment. They are deciding, because the soul can induce a state of suffering or an experience that could be suffering for us to allow us to experience something. Staying in that state, maintaining that state, supporting that state is our choice. We choose that whether we want to or not. Some people do actually choose states of suffering because they want attention. Some people do choose states of suffering because it makes them feel special. Some people do choose states of suffering because it's their way of trying to justify reacting or lashing out at people. Some people choose their state of suffering because they use it to manipulate others. There's a lot of reasons why people can choose a state of suffering. That doesn't mean everybody does it, but it means that some people actually do choose a state of suffering, whether consciously or unconsciously. And so when we talk about this and the idea of being absorbed in someone else's energy, here's an example of this. Back in the day, in my last major relationship, this was 10 plus years ago, my significant other, my boyfriend at the time, he was very much justifying his position or his behavior because of for whatever bullshit. That's what he was doing to justify his behavior, his crappy behavior. And I believed myself to be so spiritual and so powerful that I could change him and I could force him to become someone else. And a lot of us do not realize that we do not have the right, nor do we have the power to do so. So for those of you who are still in really crappy relationships thinking that you're going to change that person, you are asking for more of the same, and I do not feel sorry for you because you've pretty much set it up to maintain and sustain. So if you are continuing to run that cycle, that's on you. You're doing that to yourself. You don't have the ability or the capacity or the power to change anybody or to affect someone else's mental state. You can try to help them, you can try to nurture, you can try to support, but they ultimately still choose whether they're going to sustain or they're going to go with the help that's being offered and try to shift the trajectory of their energy. So with people who are stuck in that mindset that they can change someone else, no, not going to happen. If you find yourself being some sort of counselor to people or supporting people in that way, and you get tired or frustrated because you feel like your friends or your family, they don't appreciate you and they just continue to take advantage of you, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be that kind of person. That just means that, that just means that you are essentially working for the wrong people. You need to focus on helping people you can actually help in the world who may desire or ask for help, and not focus on helping people who are just not going to benefit from that, because you can't change them unless they choose to change themselves. People who do not attempt to heal by going within and instead focus on external causes are projecting away their power and do not accept the reality of who they are. In other words, when people get so caught up in this reality in this world and they become possessed or obsessed with the idea of their body, then they are essentially disempowering themselves, and they're trying to focus on something that they feel does give them some form of power. So if someone's attractive, or if there's someone's very in shape or muscular or whatever, and that's where they fixate on and obsess about, that is where they see their power. That is what they're getting their sense of empowerment from. Same thing with sex, same thing with relationships, same thing with drugs, same thing with all of the above, food, all of the above. And so they're allowing themselves to become disempowered, and they're embracing a state that they feel they can gain power over or they can control, because they've basically forgotten who they are in divinity, and they've disempowered themselves from a source point of view. And that becomes a trend and a reality that a lot of people go through. And a lot of us have to learn the hard way from that. And most people will learn when something happens that changes the nature of their being. So a lot of people had a lot of wake-up calls during like COVID, because they were workout freaks before COVID, and then COVID pretty much like shut that down, and they had to find a different way of being something or being of value in this world, not only to themselves but to others. It's funny because I remember my partner telling me constantly, like, all these people that he followed that were like super hot guys on Instagram or whatever, all of a sudden when COVID happened, they weren't able to post anything, and you were seeing them behind the curtain, and you were seeing a completely different version of themselves that was actually more likable, that was actually like a better version of themselves, because they couldn't put out that facade anymore. They couldn't empower themselves the way that they were before. So, all right, let's go over your questions here, because y'all have some questions about some of the content here. And by the way, like just a reminder, guys, if you're showing up trying to get a reading at this time, I'm not doing those right now. We're doing our study group, so you'll have to come back at a different time. Yes, Cassidy on Facebook, she says light workers need to be mindful not to breach free will. 100%. Not only that, but as a psychic and as a medium, in the beginning, I would become way more invested in someone's experience, and I would immediately, when someone was suffering or when someone was in a position where they needed something or they needed a handout or something, I made myself responsible for that, and I would try to help someone. And so I learned the hard way, don't do that. Like, if you're going to come from a place of working within a heightened state of awareness or of love, you can only offer so much at some point. If you're shining a light across something for someone and they put on their sunglasses because they don't really want to see that, then that's on them and you can't do anything for them. So just walk away or let it be. Don't really make yourself more responsible for that. You're not responsible for taking the sunglasses off. You're not responsible for changing that person's perspective. You're not responsible for any of those things, and you're not really in a position to make those changes. And it's actually disrespectful to that person's path and who they need to choose to be. So it's important that they gain that themselves. And yeah, you're absolutely right with that. Sarah from Sarah Toronto Smith on Facebook. That is my biggest issue. I am my own worst critic. I have watched The Secret in the past, and I constantly have to remind myself that I need to get on the right vibrational pattern. What are your thoughts on family curses passed down through the ages? I don't buy into family curses passed down through the ages, because when people start to talk about, oh, my family's been cursed for like 5 generations, I'm like, no, one of your relatives was an idiot and bought into the idea that they were cursed. And so all the crap that started happening in their lives that they continued to feed into, and they actually created more of a charge around for themselves, they began to essentially make everybody else in their life believe that this was affecting everybody. So all of a sudden, everybody starts sharing the same mindset, and then that same mindset becomes a norm in that family for generations. That's what I would call a curse. So it's that one person that basically messed up and created the first bad mental state of being, and then it kind of spread into everybody else and became a conditioned state that everybody else had to suffer from. And you can stop that cycle. You can stop that pattern. It's almost like, think of it as alcoholism. When you have a parent who is an alcoholic and the children become alcoholics and then that continues to perpetuate, that is a cyclical pattern that shares. But it didn't start with a curse. It started with bad behavior or crappy behavior or an inability to heal self and only to subdue to this state of lower experience. And so everybody else who picked up that habit, they continued the cyclical pattern. So there was not that was not a curse. That was a bad conditioned state that was taught and created and perpetuated through the family line. That's what that's about. So when people come to me and say, my family's cursed, and for 5 generations, I'm like, for 5 generations, your family's been dumb as shit because they literally subdued themselves. They gave over their power and they allowed themselves to be affected by their own alignment with lower vibration. They fed into the belief. They fed into that. This is why you have generations of people who buy into myths or who buy into conspiracies or who buy into experiences that continue to be perpetuated. My family has been poor for generations. So you can consider myself and my sister no longer in that cycle because in our own mindsets, what I learned energetically, I used and it changed my life. And so I brought myself out of poverty. And then I taught one of my sisters the exact same things. She took herself out of poverty. And so even though still a majority of our family suffers from states of poverty because there is a mindset that they've bought into, we can try to help those people. We can try to share with them what we learned. But if they choose not to change or if they choose not to embrace any different way of being, it will be perpetuated within the family and they will continue on that pattern. And that's what ends up happening in those situations as well. We're always going to be our worst critic. But the thing about it is criticize. It's one thing to give yourself advice that can be helpful. It's another thing to just be mean to yourself and nasty to yourself. And if you're criticizing yourself or telling yourself that you're not worthy enough or that you're not good enough, that's your ego. That is the part of you that exists only in this state that you're essentially enforcing and continue to empower and believe and buy into. And that's its job. Its job is to actually make us more physical, but we're not of this world. We're here, but we're not of this world. We're just simply participants in it. And so being our worst critic, it's hard. And what you have to do is you actually you have to fake love yourself at first to change that mindset, that pattern, because you have to tell yourself how incredible you are, how wonderful you are, and you have to express love as often as possible, not just for yourself, but for others as well. If you come from that place, it shifts the projection, it shifts the mechanisms within your brain, and it actually becomes a normal habit. And so that's what I had to do for myself as well, because I grew up and I was very sarcastic and jaded and critical, and to some extent, and then sometimes I still am, but in a funny way. But for the most part, I shut myself down when I start beating myself up about something, because I'm like, no, stop it. There's a reason for this. There's a purpose here. Look at that, grab what you can from that, and then shut the hell up about it and then move on. Because I have to tell myself, I'm very tough love with myself. If I start getting into that state, I have to basically come for myself and come for myself with love. I have to basically beat myself up with love to snap myself out of it, because I can get into that state. We all can, because this physical world is not an easy experience to have for any person, even the highest of highest here. I don't do cards. So I know someone was asking me to do cards. I don't do cards. I used to do tarot when I first started doing this, but I didn't really care for them because I felt like cards were very limiting. It's almost like a coloring book. When you think of a coloring book, okay, now only color within the lines. And so you can't really draw your own thing. You have to stick with what's already there. That's how I feel about tarot cards. That doesn't mean that they're not useful, that you can't actually do very well with them. It just wasn't my process. It just didn't really work for me. So I don't really do cards. That's why I tell my sister that all the time, because she's always like, no, something's going on. Tira las cartas, which is Spanish for do a card spread. I'm like, girl, I haven't used cards in over 7 or 8 years. So I'm like, I don't know why you still think that that's what I do, because I don't do that anymore. But yeah, there's something wrong with that. It's just not my process. Yeah, I think, yeah, Cassie's like, that's why those in deep grief need the help of those around them because they cannot summon the energy to heal themselves. Yes and no. So I would agree with that because I do think that people they need an alternative to their suffering. So if you can offer them an alternative, which means having something else to temporarily focus on or having something else that helps them to feel that they're alive, and not having to pay attention to the moment of pain or suffering or loss or grief, that's a way to give someone experiences that can help them to know that there is life outside of the grief. That's important, and I think that's useful to people. But for myself in my own process, because I do go through periods personally where I go into a deep level of emotional awareness and emotional, it's just a very deep emotional state, but the emotions that I'm experiencing are either like, I wouldn't say pain because I wouldn't even describe it as pain because my physical body doesn't really feel pain, but I would call it either loss or, gosh, what would I even call that? That's an interesting perspective because I never really stopped to think about it. Because when I'm going through something and I'm processing something, if I'm heartbroken over something, and that's what I would call it, heartbreak. When we are in this state and we are experiencing this reality and we are encountering ourselves and my heart is broken because of either people not remembering who they are and acting from states of lower suffering or of pain, or of being heartbroken by the inability for people to achieve or to rise to an occasion. I go through those, and that's the closest thing that I would describe to that. When I'm going through a heartbreaking experience, I kind of need to sit with it for a bit, and I need to let myself experience it because I actually examine a lot of things about myself through that, because I don't just immediately say, oh, that person did this to me, or that person did that to me. I start to immediately we want to blame everybody else for what we're going through. I try not to do that. Instead, I actually blame myself immediately because I'm like, okay, I have to own this experience. This is my experience. What have I done? How did I create this experience for myself? And I will find 99.9% of the time that I did something, or I didn't pay attention to one piece, or I decided to ignore one piece, and then I moved forward anyways. And then that's where I made the mistake, or that's where I took a misstep. And so I tried to do that. But I also examine myself as well, because if I'm going through suffering or I'm suffering internally, then there's something that I've contributed to that. There's something that I contribute to that because I've allowed myself to get into a state of suffering, and I need to self-examine. And so I use that pain, though it's not a fun process to go through, and I'm a bitch to be around when that's happening, but I self-examine because I have to understand how I contributed to this experience or this event or this thing. And then I can work on changing that within myself that didn't serve me in that moment. Yeah, Daria's like, so I am hearing you say the way I'm thinking of the way you're asking it. You're probably not even asking it this way, but this is how I'm picturing it. You asking. So I'm hearing you say that we ultimately make or create our reality. That's how I feel like you're saying it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's a spiritual universal truth. Now you know, if you go into a reality state and you're dealing with understanding that from a reality of this world, there's a lot of contradictions or conflicts you're going to run into because it isn't going to fit perfectly with how this world is conditioned us to believe things are. So if you are examining that from the human perspective, it's going to be hard to understand the full scope of it. But when you take yourself to a higher perspective of spiritual awareness and just whole awareness as a source being or as a higher perspective of yourself, you will understand the perfection of that design. But yes, to answer your question, the answer is yes. We are ultimately responsible for everything we go through in this physical reality. Okay, so let's go over here real quick. Let me see. Pop here. Oh, where am I going? I'm like, oh, I waved at Candy. Good, Candy, you get that wave. Get that wave, girl. Hey, Carlos. Let's see. Let's see. Hey, big fish. So, Beloop, I hope I'm saying that correctly. How do we know what lessons we are supposed to acquire? So here's the thing. Being in this physical body, being source and form, if I am trying to get from Houston, let's just use Houston, to California, which is out west, and I'm trying to get from Houston to LA, and I just drive west, I'm probably going to encounter a lot of opportunities and experiences just by heading west. That already is directing me towards an entire layer and cacophony of experience, right? It's a lot of stuff that I'm already going to be aligning myself with. Now, if I say, okay, I'm going to go from Houston to LA, I'm only going to take this specific freeway, that's going to limit the types of experiences I'm going to have, because I'm not just heading randomly west, I'm using a very specific path to get there. When we are in soul form, the personality that we create, the personality of Ferny that my soul created, my soul Aja created Ferny to have this experience as a tool to be used. It set up the personality in all of these variations of the personal perspective. It set up all of these pieces in a very unique way so that I would essentially limit what I was going to experience, and that the experiences I was going to primarily have were going to be condensed into and focused into that particular route or path. We all come in with like a soul path of things we're going to experience over the course of lifetime. We're not here to be born only to have one achievement or to have one thing we achieve in this lifetime. That is some BS that we came up with. Oh, what is my purpose? What is my purpose? Your life is your purpose. Like, that's what you're here to do. So we are here to have experiences, and experiences in small, minute forms and in larger forms. So we're here designed to have experiences, and it's designed to have a select form of experiences or select a grouping of experiences. Going through that, if I don't make good choices and I end up picking a crappy car, I'm probably going to have a lot of drama on my path because I made a bad choice there. So there are things we can do that can make that path and that journey much more difficult for us because we're not aware of how the bigger picture is going to be played out. We're not aware of ourselves in a bigger form. We're just simply focused on the moment, in that moment. And so we get caught up with the human experience and the human frailty of the ego, and then trying to avoid, suffering or pain. So we do anything we can that makes us feel better to try to avoid that. But in the process of doing that, we sometimes actually end up making mistakes and not really being completely aware. So along that journey, we can run into a whole host of drama that was never really thrown in there as part of the recipe that the soul had designed. And that's on us. That really is on us in this human form to make those choices and decisions so we can reduce the amount of suffering we're going to encounter on the journey. But there's still things we're going to encounter along the way because of the way it was designed. And so how you can know what lessons you are meant to have is by actually becoming aware of every experience you have. Being aware of what you're experiencing, understanding the different levels of that experience, because the immediate reaction to what's going on isn't the lesson. If someone has done something to me and it has caused me to become angry or upset, my reaction, that's just a surface immediate human experience. That's a human grounded experience. But then when I stop after that and look at how I've reacted, and I assess that and examine myself, examine what that created within me. Why did I react? There's the lesson. There's the lesson. It's just like an onion. If you treat every single experience you have like an onion, the surface, the outside of the onion has a skin you can't really use. You can't really use that skin. You can probably make broth with it, but you can't really use that skin. It's not really going to be beneficial in the process of cooking. But if you peel away those dead layers, which is the human conditional state, this limited perspective, this limited thing, you peel away those layers and you look within, there's layers of something you can use there. And it's the same thing. Every experience we have in life is like an onion. The immediate response or the immediate experience isn't the most meaningful or the most impactful for the soul. But once you actually start to unwrap it and examine and play with it, there's a lot more there. That's when you will get more of it. And most of us don't even realize the depth of an experience until we're on the other side, because at that point, we're no longer attached to the physical experience of human frailty, of human suffering. We are now released from that state, and now we can see things from a completely different perspective. And so the things that we would be bothered by in this state no longer exist for us in that state. And so we have much more awareness and understanding. That is why a spirit or a soul that is the basis of the spirit can understand where it went wrong or what it did that may have caused suffering for others that was not part of its actual mission or part of its plan or agenda for this lifetime. So that is why we are able to understand that from that perspective. But the thing is, we can experience that here in this form as well, but we have to become aware enough. And most people are not aware. Most people are operating from a very surface level understanding of this reality. I wake up and I worry about what I need to fix, what I need to do differently, what needs to change in my life so that I can experience no suffering or less suffering. That is what most people's experience is about. What can I do to reduce my experience of suffering? What can I give myself to make myself feel pleasure instead of the suffering? And how can I control that so that I maintain that forever? That is what most people's surface level experience is about. You wake up thinking about your job. You wake up thinking about your relationship. You wake up thinking about this or that. Go to sleep doing the exact same thing. Go through the day thinking about those exact same things, when that is not the primary emphasis for you being here. Those experiences, those interactions can serve us, but that's not what you're designed to really get out of this life. Some people still will, and there's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You're not failing at life. You can't fail at life. You can only make it more challenging for you, and you can miss opportunities where you could have done things in a much different way and in a way that is more intentional. So being an intentional experiencer of this life is the goal, not avoiding the suffering of this life. That's not the goal. We can find ways of reducing suffering and embracing our higher nature, which is automatically going to bring us more joy and more happiness and more love. But we're here to be the best experiencers that we can be. And the best way to do that is to pay attention when you're going through experience, which is awareness. And that is what that's about. Gracie Giselle, how do we stop resisting uncomfortable situations? How does that cross over with desire of changing that situation? Depends on the situation. So if you're in a physical state of pain, there's only so much you can do to avoid that. You probably can't avoid it or ignore it to some extent. And either you will have to find a way to be at peace with that or find some way to divert your attention away from that. And in some instances, people will use medication or drugs to keep themselves from becoming consumed by the state. But with being uncomfortable in situations, it depends, because when it comes to people, I always used to be uncomfortable with like it being quiet. I always used to be uncomfortable with certain scenarios where I was with people, and a majority of it had to do with the fact that I cared too much about what people thought. That's what it was about. It was about I cared too much what people thought. I cared too much what people had to say. I cared too much what people felt, and I felt like I needed to be responsible for their experience. I'm not responsible for somebody else's experience. And so when I'm doing my work and I'm putting myself out there and I'm giving you what I'm giving you, you're having the experience that you're having. I'm not responsible for that. I'm only responsible for my end of it, but I will still continue to do it the way that I need to. But in the past, I may have been very much more focused on what your experience was of it because I care too much about other people's opinions and perspectives and experiences and not enough about my own. And so it actually would rob me of a more authentic, genuine awareness of the moment and of the situation. And so when it comes to people and being uncomfortable around people, it has usually more to do with caring too much about what other people think, say, or feel and their experience, and you wanting to control their experience. If it's a situation that you're directly going through and it's just you and the experience, that has more to do with what you're choosing in that moment for yourself and how you're choosing to accept or utilize that experience, because it can be useful to you in some way. and this is what I say to people, like every single time I've had an issue with a client, which is not very often, every year I usually have like 2 or 3. That's not a lot at all. That's actually pretty low in this industry, but I don't have a lot of crazy experiences with clients just because I am able to focus on what is being gained from the experience. And if someone comes for me or comes to me and they say this or they say that, I take a look at what that is. Is it an opportunity? For example, there was a client, I think a few weeks back, where they made a comment that I may have said some things to them, and there was a lot of things that were correct, but there were some things that didn't happen the way that I had mentioned or that I had said. Now, granted, that in itself, I don't always take that at face value because people's perceptions of what I said is very different from what I said. And so this is why I give everybody a recording so that they can go back and listen to what I said, not remember what they thought I said, because that's two different things. But let's give this person the benefit of the doubt. Let's say I did say something, it didn't happen, which is very possible because I'm not perfect. I don't have a 100% accuracy rate. No psychic does. And so when that comment was given to me, I could have said, oh my God, they're saying that I'm a horrible psychic, or they're saying that I'm wrong, or that I don't have any real skill. I could have taken it there because ego wants to react and charge back. But instead I was like, this is a perfect opportunity to clarify something for people because they don't know what they don't know. And so instead I wrote I wrote a Dear Ferny that went out last week about why some psychics are more accurate or better than others, or better at it than others. And then I wrote an entire article about it as well, because in this industry, there is a mindset that psychics are infallible, they're perfect, they know everything, they can see everything, and there's no room for error. And that is the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard, because that's never been the reality to any psychic in ever existed. Even Edgar Cayce, even the psychics, the prophets, they all got some shit wrong. Because people are human and they get stuff wrong. And so for me, it was like, this is an opportunity to try to help clear up the myths of this industry. So I used it, instead of using it as a personal attack on me, I used this as an opportunity to provide value and worth to people, knowing what they are dealing with when they are dealing with psychics in any way, shape, or form. So I used it as an opportunity. So I shifted the trajectory of what it could have done for me, and instead I used it as an opportunity to do something that I think could hold value for others. And that's what you can do, is something that could potentially be a negative experience, use it as a positive experience. Not only that, but I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I'm probably one of the very few psychics you will ever meet who is going to be 100% honest with you about the fact that psychics don't see everything, don't know everything, and don't have a 100% accuracy rate and can never have a 100% accuracy rate. I'm probably going to be one of the few psychics, because most of the psychics that I know, they will totally make up some bullshit and then they will put that out there and they'll try to make that be like as if this has always been the reality of psychics. I'm like, no, I don't know where y'all get your information from, but it's not the reality of how this works. And I've been doing this work a long time, and I've also studied some of the best, and I know that to be not the case at all. So again, I use it as an opportunity to change some of the myths in that. Reiki is a form of energy healing. It's based on an old, I think it's Japanese, so it's based in old Japanese, because it's been so long since I took Reiki class. And actually when I took Reiki class and I got certified, after I started to do Reiki for the first year of my internship, I got bored with it. I was like, this is boring. So going through the traditional standard model of Reiki was just not working for me. So I decided to just create my own model instead. And it ended up having more of an effect during the healing sessions for people than going through the process of Reiki. Because when someone tells you how to use your power, it's a great way to use your power. But when you figure out where your power lies and you start to find ways to use your power that is much more effective for you or comfortable for you, you actually empower yourself further, and it has more charge behind it. So, but that's what Reiki is. It's a system of healing that can help in different ways. Let's see. And for those of you, Roxy, she's popping up in here. She's my assistant, so she might comment on this or that. And that's the only person you'll have reach out to you who is authorized to reach out to people. So that would be Roxy. Yeah, Valentina's like, she says, I serenade myself with Lauryn Hill's Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. I sing that to myself to bring myself back to self-love. That's a great way to do it. I think little things like that, like what, if you can go back into your life and pull at something that you experienced that helped you to feel happy or joy or empowered, and you recreate that experience for yourself, it will continue to bring more of the same in. So for example, every Sunday I make a big breakfast because that's what my mom used to do. And so it makes me feel good. It makes me feel taken care of. It makes me feel that nurturing energy. And so that's one thing I do that helps me to feel that or connect with that energy. And it really is about that. It's connecting with that version or that part of yourself that had an experience that you actually got pleasure or joy from. Producing more of those and using more of those will actually help you in the long run, and it will create more of a consistent resting state as well. Yes, exactly. Valentina says, right, love that. You are the protagonist. Directors don't produce in your movie. You are the main character. Yes, exactly. I get to essentially call the shots and dictate what I'm going to do. I'm either going to do it or I'm not. But that was going to force me to do it anyways. And ultimately, what's really freeing is knowing that you are ultimately accountable to what's going to happen in your life. So if I lose everything tomorrow, I know what I can do and I know what I'm capable of. So I will figure it out and I will adapt, and then I will find a way to reestablish a stable place of being that works for me. So because I know myself. So it's almost like, so I never really feel like I'm at risk of being destroyed or risk of losing, because I know that I can always continue to shift the trajectory of how things are coming at me so that I can try to stay ahead of it or try to use it to my advantage. And so that's the difference between someone who's victimized by life and someone who becomes the manifester or the master of it. Now, granted, I still have to deal with reality in instances, and there's still that stuff that gets thrown at me. But I will figure it out. I'll do my very best to work around it, and I know that I'm capable of doing it because I've done it over and over and over again in a long series of period of my life. We pick, so vanilla 2323, we pick and choose the tools for our life experience. Yeah, our bodies. Our bodies are the tool. So I picked this body in soul form. You picked your body in soul form. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, because there are some things I would have preferred to be a little bit different, because being a gay man in this world makes you very critical of yourself and your body, which is an issue in the gay community. But I would totally want to do some different things or change some things, but at the same time, I was like, screw it. It is what it is. I mean, what the hell? What the hell? So I just, at that point, you get to a point where you just don't care anymore. You're just like, to hell with it. Yeah, it's nice to look good or to feel good about yourself, but to hell with it. I don't have enough time to sit there and obsess about whether my teeth are perfect or whether this or that or whatever. I got stuff to do. And so when you go into life with that kind of mental focus, some of the things that, we normally would be caught up in or be obsessed over with our bodies or our physical, the tool of our body, we just no longer submit to it, and we're no longer the victim of it. She also asked, what about things that happened before I was born that affect life? Is that the same? Yeah, exactly. So before your physical incarnation, there is a soul being that is the center of that entire process for you. So basically, before you incarnated, there is a version of you that's the bigger version of you, the grander version of you, we can call it the soul, that said, I want to have this experience, and I have had experiences in these other different timelines and time periods, and I got this from this and I got that from that. So this personality, I'm going to produce it so that essentially it can do this, because I could have maybe approached this situation differently in this scenario, or I could have, and it's all strategy. It's all simulations. Our soul is obsessed with simulating experience. And so it's already had games it's played with these other timelines. And so what it collects in the data or information helps it to produce this new version of itself, which is just it's a new personality. So when people think of new souls, it's actually like a personality that's been produced from it. But it's just a version of itself that it's kind of life like materializing in some way to have a unique experience. And so whatever's happened in other lifetimes, I'm tied to, I can like tap into those experiences and energy, and vice versa. They can tap into me. Some of my other lifetimes have probably had experiences with someone that they like, you know, you could say like maybe 200 years ago, there was a version of me that existed. And that version of me, maybe it was having psychic dreams, and it kept saying, I keep seeing this man keeps coming to me in a white shirt, and he keeps wearing a white shirt, and he keeps acknowledging and trying to share messages with me. Well, he's talking about me. I'm the one that's coming probably in my dream state. So there's versions of ourselves that we interact with, that we engage with. And so what we choose as our tools and as our opportunities to learn, we do so from that perspective. And then we come here and we buy into that reality, and then we live life as that personality. Mm-hmm. So Leanne Vale, and this will be my last question because I got a lot of, there's a good question. So Leanne from Facebook says, I'm so confused about past lives and reincarnation. So if we have lives and so if we have lives and are reincarnated into a new life after we pass, does that mean our loved ones who have passed on are no longer with us and we will never see again? No. So here's the thing. That's like saying, okay, Ferny, but we're creating new models of vehicles. Does that mean that we can never use the Chevy from like the 50s or the 80s or whatever? No, that model still exists. It still exists. It's still something. And something that is also hard for people to grasp is that when we talk about past lives, because we talk about past lives and there's also future lives as well, everything that exists is not actually happening in the way that we're experiencing it. We are just experiencing everything that is as it exists through this method, meaning that the way that we're designed in physical form is to have a moment of a conscious experience, and then have another moment of experience, and have another moment of experience. And so when we go from one moment to the next, to the next, to the next, that produces the experience of time. We only have that in this form, in this state. But when you look at it all from the perspective of God or source, it is all happening simultaneously. There is technically no beginning or no end. It is all happening simultaneously, which means all of my past lives are actually still occurring. They're still happening because they are part of this. It's really complicated, and it gets a little bit tricky for people. And that's why I try not to talk about that part of it, because people immediately will go get completely lost in that whole thought pattern. But all the past, all the future, it is all happening simultaneously. My past lives exist currently now. And so sometimes when people are experiencing ghosts in their home, and their ghosts are like dressed from like something periods, for them, that still exists. That time frame is still existing for them. They're just experiencing a different version of that from the moment, but that we are having that experience. But everything in the past is still actually happening simultaneously as everything in the future. The only thing that actually changes this for us is the way we experience reality. We experience reality in one moment to the next, to the next, to the next, which produces a singular experience, or a moment that gives us a sense of what has been experienced before versus what has yet to be experienced. And so we're kind of going from one conscious moment to the next. That's time. That's all the time is. So time technically doesn't exist. Our idea of time doesn't really exist. It's the way we experience time that exists, because all things exist now. What we use to measure time are changes in this reality, which is changes within. And we use the moon, we use the planets, we use life beginning and ending. We use all of these different ways to measure time, but it doesn't actually exist. Our conscious experience of life, of this reality, is what is time, and that's what produces it. So that's a really hard concept to grasp, because if I threw you out in the middle of nowhere in space, there's nothing to measure time with. The only thing you have is your conscious awareness of this moment to the next moment to the next moment, which is why when people start to have more freedom in their lives, and I can say this from experience. Like for me, I feel like time is speeding up because it feels like every day is happening so quickly, and I'm always like, oh my God, there's not enough time. So for me, it's like there's not enough time where time is going so fast. And I think I remember back to when I was a kid, and I felt like time was so slow, and there was like so much time in a day, and like, what am I going to do to fill all that time? Very different experience of time. And so it's us individually that experience it very differently. So that's what tends to happen with the experience or the idea of time. But all our past lives or future lives exist simultaneously. And not only that, but we don't just have one lifetime after a next after a next. We actually have, with all of the different lifetimes, this is where it gets so complicated. It's so hard to explain. And I want to create a diagram to explain this to people because it really is so complex. I exist in different forms within this reality. Not just in this moment, but in past moments and in future moments, the way we would call the past or the future. So I had a lifetime, and I've talked about this in one of my videos, I had a lifetime where I was a stewardess on the ship, the Titanic. I remember those memories. I remember those experiences. And so that was one lifetime. I was also simultaneously in the same time frame, another person that I will call Tito. We'll call him Tito. And so there was another person that I was in that lifetime as well. And my soul is like, think of the soul as like an octopus. The octopus doesn't just have, a hand that is its past and a hand that is, or its tentacle that is its past and its tentacle that is the future. An octopus is going out in all different directions. And so it can experience and do things simultaneously. The soul operates in a very similar way. The way that it expresses its consciousness into this reality can happen simultaneously in the different periods, and it's gaining that simultaneously as God is experiencing things simultaneously. God is the culmination of all that is. All that is exists simultaneously. If it wasn't just, I can only experience this part of myself, I can't experience that part of myself, then you've limited who you are and what you are, and that's just not the way it works. So that's kind of the way I want to describe that. It's a little complex, but that's the way that I would describe it. So, all right, guys, I love you all. I'm out of time. I gotta get to getting. So thank you so much for participating. I will be back on Friday for our Conversations with God study group. So until then, y'all take care of yourselves. I love you.